All right, I'm going to give this just a second, friends, because on my end, I'm seeing an error message that says that the stream output is too low for some reason. I don't know why. Everything was great when I tested it earlier, and now it's saying video output too low. I don't even know why. So I assume that's a bandwidth issue. I don't want to get too deep into this and then disappoint you all, but if things go as planned, today we'll be talking about Chargegate, which is the latest iPhone problem. So far, Apple has not responded to claims that the iPhone XS and XS Plus do not always charge properly unless you unplug and plug them back in or lift up the screen or turn it on or something along those lines. iOS 12 said to send the wrong messages, to send messages to the wrong contacts. That could be a problem for obvious reasons. The iPhone XS does not have a beauty filter. That's what we're being told. Despite the smoothing effect that people are seeing when they take selfies, California has enacted a net neutrality bill, and Governor Brown did sign on to it, so all sorts of interesting things will probably start happening in the near future. The LG V40 ThinQ 5 camera setup, an explanation behind why we need to have 5 cameras on our phones now, and Facebook confirms giving advertisers access to your phone number that you use for two-factor authentication. Big shocker there, right? All right, let's talk some tech. Let's move to the next screen here. Okay, I clicked off of that. All right, so Nate, you're saying it looks good. I'm going to take your word for it. I don't know what's going on this end. It says video output too low. So you guys, if I start lagging or anything, let me know. I can always just shut the video off and leave the audio only, I guess, if I have to. I'd prefer not to do that. But the obvious one today, let's straighten out the screen here, Mike. I'm all over the place here. This happens on occasion. Okay, so I think this is where we want it to be. So Apple has not really responded to this. If you haven't heard about it already, there's a new thing. It's got to be a gate whenever there's a problem. It's called Chargegate. And in fact, I saw a tweet from our friend Real World Review last night that said that he had his phone on the charger at like 81% for half an hour and it never actually moved up. Well, apparently this is kind of a widespread thing. A lot of people are realizing that when they plug their phones in and leave them overnight or whatever period of time it may be, expecting to come back and have a fully charged phone, that is not always the case with the new iPhone models. And there's not really a definite explanation as to why this is happening. It seems like it is most likely a software related issue, we would assume. Apple hasn't confirmed that yet. So it's still choppy but watchable. Okay, I don't know what to tell everyone. If it gets really bad, I'll reboot, but I hate to interrupt the stream. I don't know if it's the modem, my computer, my resources are fine. I'm under 50%, so I don't know. Every time something happens with net neutrality or I even talk about it, I seem to be punished somehow. In any case, this is an interesting thing. Obviously when a new phone comes out, especially with a price point that's over $1,000, you think it's going to be working smoothly. And of course, what we're hearing is that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, Oscar sent me a message over the weekend that had something to do with an iOS problem. Also, I've had a couple other technicians that I've worked with and or trained who said that ever since people have updated to iOS 12, they've been having problems with everything from the touchscreen to the charge port to the modem firmware, which is unusual. It doesn't seem like that would be an issue, but sometimes when your phone has a problem that we could call marginal, where it's still operating, if you push into the next operating system, that will often reveal those underlying problems. And then you'll find out that certain functionalities are no longer there. In the past, my understanding was I remember when we restored an iPhone and it had a problem. One of the examples is error 4013. We used to see that all the time when there were certain problems with the phone or the USB connection, the charge port, and so forth. Instead of that happening, what I've been told is with iOS 12, the phone will go ahead and restore, but now you'll just lose some functionality, which, I don't know what's worse, having an error message and not being able to get your phone to turn on, or have your phone act like it's working properly, but there's actually some problem with it. Excuse me one second, I gotta turn on the fan in here. It is getting a bit warmer today than I expected. Dave Hammerton, what's going on? Let's see, yeah, so I made it to here. So this is what's happening apparently, is several, I don't know how many that is, but the guy who does the unboxing therapy channel kind of brought this into the mainstreams. attention. Several users have reported that their device refuses to charge if it has been idle for a while. Some charge only if the display is woken up. So in other words, you plug your phone in, and if you don't turn the display on, it may not actually be charging. Lewis Hills, I'm going to have a tough one with this. Lewis, the guy from Unbox Therapy, said that, or he's dubbed this Chargegate. In a video, he's demonstrated the problem on multiple phones, so it's not just limited to, you know, obviously, if this guy has 9 phones and several of them don't charge properly, then this is certainly going to be a widespread problem we would expect. Apple so far not commenting on the issue. Obviously makes sense. You know, you don't come out and admit fault until you figure out what the problem is exactly. And in Apple's case, sometimes that will even prevent them from coming out and admitting that there's a problem. But the real question is, how do we fix this? And, you know, every indication is that this will be a software issue. So hopefully, if you went out and dropped, you know, $1,000, $1,200, $15 on an iPhone, you will have some sort of solution in the next patch. Until then, you have to make sure that your screen's turned on, or you have to plug your charger in a few times and probably keep an eye on it and make sure that it is actually charging. I would not be too surprised if Apple were to come out with some sort of dongle that you could purchase that would make sure that your phone is charging while you have it plugged in, because then you can, you know, drop another 30, 40 bucks, and then you can make sure that your phone works properly in the meantime. Most of the phones would charge only when the display was activated to wake up the device. However, one of them would not charge at all, and this is out of 9 phones that he tested on his channel. So several complaints about the XS and XS Max failing to charge have also been posted on Apple's discussion forum on its website. And the interesting thing to me is this, when we look at a lot of these issues, is that now we have social media, we have YouTube, we have all sorts of different ways to get information. If that wasn't the case, you know, if you couldn't just go online and look at some social media, what are the odds that things like this would be showing up on television channels or newspapers or any other types of media who get their advertising dollars from large corporations? I'm curious to know, you know, how much different would this story have been? It might have been a word of mouth thing to where people just talk about it. You might happen to hear about it from someone else, or you might not have any idea that it's going on, even, you know, after the point when the thing is patched. Now, there is a theory that when Apple implemented this new feature that basically times out the USB functionality on your phone, this may have something to do with the charging problem. So if you remember, a few months back, they talked about an update in iOS that would basically prevent people from having access to your phone if it had been idle for a certain amount of time. So you could still charge your phone, but you wouldn't be able to communicate with a computer when you plug it in, because as a security precaution. So, you know, there's obviously 2 sides to this as well, but Apple has kind of been going back and forth with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies about privacy and allowing access to people's information on their devices. And of course, you know, regardless of what their true ideals are, you certainly want your reputation to the public to reflect that their privacy needs to be protected. This is a big thing now, obviously, you know, whether we're dealing with Facebook or Apple or Samsung or anyone else, every customer wants to believe that when something is private, it's private. You're not giving it out to anyone else. It's not easy for people to get a hold of. We would expect it to be encrypted and so forth. And obviously, we're finding out that is not always the case. So again, if it weren't for social media, and if it weren't for you know, Reddit and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all these other places where people have a platform to communicate information to large numbers of people, there's a good chance that we wouldn't even know that this stuff is going on. I find that fascinating. So I'm going to assume we're okay at the moment. I don't know why I have video output too low. This is the weirdest thing. But do let me know if it gets any worse, because I don't want to continue here if it's torturing everyone. But next up, let's talk about this real quick, because we're on the topic of Apple. In fact, I want to get all the Apple stuff out of the way, because that is always the big news, it seems like, especially surrounding the release of a new phone, or this phone release time of year. So Apple, hey, what's going on, Harvey? Apple, thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's tough to really know here. Like, I can see myself in the monitor, but my computer is even lagging on this end for some weird reason. Apple users claiming that iOS 12 is sending iMessages to the wrong contacts. Now, I want to state this again. It's an interesting thing that we have a lot of people who will download the beta version of an operating system because they just want to be the first to try it out. They know that there are risks involved with that. They agree to that. They say, hey, I'm a beta tester. I know I'm going to run into some problems, and I'm willing to work with that, and hopefully you can roll it back if there's an issue. But then we have the general public who will typically assume that every time a new version or an update to an operating system is available, that must be a good thing for them. And I believe that the intention often is, most of the time manufacturers, people who develop software, they are concerned with security patches, optimizing performance, a number of things that will benefit users. But at the same time, it is always impossible to know what the long-term effects are going to be when it comes to changing an operating system. We do know that if you're using an iPhone 7, for example, that iOS 12 is not optimized for that phone. That phone has been out for several years. Apple is concerned with making an operating system for their flagship phones. I mean, it wouldn't make sense for them to say, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make this operating system work with our old phones. The idea is that if you want the latest, greatest, best performance there is, you need to buy a brand new phone every year. I mean, that's kind of become the accepted norm. So with that in mind, we understand that iOS 12 is made for the iPhone XS and the iPhone XS Plus. Now, it will support other models of phones, but obviously the priority is to make sure that it is going to be functioning properly with the latest releases. And that generally means that people who are a generation or two back on their phones are probably going to be the first ones to notice that, hey, this is causing me some problems. Whether it's just causing the operating system to go slower, maybe there are some glitches where the charging doesn't work properly, maybe there are situations where third-party touchscreens are not functioning correctly because they were designed to work with a prior operating system. And for something to be pushed out, it's really difficult to know what the widespread and long-term effects are going to be. So obviously we're going to run into this kind of thing. It's unfortunate, I think, that most people take for granted that whenever there's an update, they need the update, that it's in their best interest to do it. That is not often the case. And I'm speaking from personal experience. I've got a phone that's a few years old. There's no way I'm updating from 10.3 because my phone works flawlessly and it doesn't. I have had zero problems. I have nothing on there that I'm concerned about being hacked. So what is my incentive to update the software and make my phone run slower and potentially open myself up to more problems? I don't have that. So, this is all a case-by-case basis. But at the same time, there's not a lot of communication that lets people know, hey, you might want to wait before you update. Make sure that this version is working properly for your phone. And every time there's a new iOS, or OS for that matter, there's always going to be some issues. And it kind of surprises me in a way that a lot of people react negatively. I can't believe this. I updated and now my phone doesn't work properly. Well, the software's only been available for a week. So how do you really know if it's in your best interest? But, I've given up on trying to discourage people from updating until they know for sure that this is a solid operating system. Good luck with that argument. It doesn't work out too well, at least in my experience. I just say, look, if you want to do it, just understand there are some risks. I wish you the best, but we're already seeing problems. So again, among these, users claiming that iOS is sending iMessages to the wrong contacts. And I've seen some variations of this that are cause for concern previously, which I'll get back to in a second, but a new previously unannounced iOS 12 feature was intended to merge chats that you had with iOS device users who have multiple phone numbers and emails. Unfortunately, something different happened. Mistakenly merging contacts that belong to completely separate individuals, messages intended for just one person are being sent to, for example, both their husband and child, or their mother and sister. I don't know why they put that in the order that they did. But in any case, you can see what's happening here is that people who have an iTunes account that is associated to another device are going to end up getting messages that were intended for another family member or someone else who was on that account. So this could cause some potential problems. Obviously, I suppose we should keep in mind nowadays that anything that you say or do is being recorded in one way or another, whether it's audio, video, whatever, some sort of documentation. So use some caution, obviously. Eventually, I think we're going to be at a point where everyone sees and hears what everyone does 24 hours a day. So if you can't say anything nice, it may come back to haunt you later on. Messages being sent to unintended third parties could very well be a disaster for those gossiping among coworkers or someone cheating on their significant other. Well, hopefully you don't fall into either of those groups, but still a cause for concern, because sometimes you want to have a conversation with one person and not their entire family. You know, there are good, legitimate reasons for that. In most cases, the affected users all appear to be in an immediate family relationship. That, to me, would point to having a shared iTunes account, or maybe having an iTunes account installed on multiple devices, and maybe it gets handed to another family member and they don't remove that account from the device. And I got to tell you, friends, I have had this experience firsthand. I got an iPhone that had been restored back to factory settings, and somehow the old iCloud account was still associated with the phone. I have no idea how this worked, but I plugged it into my computer, and the text messages that were currently being sent and received by the person who previously owned the phone started to show up on my computer. So, you know, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, how can you be sure that this stuff is completely gone? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe a new major flaw released in any version of Android. I don't know, probably. You know, it seems like with Android we hear about a lot of different problems, but because it's cross-platform, it's like it has this type of problem with this vendor, with this model of phone, and it varies from one to the next. You would think that Android developers are probably most concerned with the most prolific Android devices on the market, but when it's Apple, it's kind of like one operating system, 2 or 3 devices when it comes to their phones. These bugs you would think would be worked out. I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot fewer variables there. You're making the hardware and the software. You're testing this stuff, we would hope, for a while before you send it out to the public. But who knows? You know, there are always time constraints, and people are certainly under pressure to meet deadlines. And I'm sure a lot of those deadlines aren't met no matter who you work for. Oh, you said name a major flaw release. Sorry, let me go back and read that again. Name a major flaw released in any version of Android. Someone help me out there. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I would assume there are some, but yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. My MacBook 2011 just became outdated. It's not compatible with the newest update. Harvey, I have a MacBook Air mid-2011 myself, and I haven't updated that thing for about 2 years because the last update that I did made it almost unusable for publishing videos. So I had to get a completely new laptop because the amount of time that it took to render any video was ridiculous. So that may not be a terrible thing, just saying. In fact, I haven't updated my newer machine either out of the same concern. So be careful if you have ever shared a phone with anyone else, if you've ever bought a used phone, or if you sell your used phone to someone. I don't know what the 100% assurance is that your messages won't go to the wrong people, but apparently that is a potential problem if you own an iPhone, probably if you own any phone. I don't know, just saying. So the iPhone XS has been getting a lot of heat, obviously, and this is going to happen every year, right? And I'll give Apple credit. They sell a lot of phones. So when you become popular, you become an easy target. People are going to look at any problem that you possibly might have and amplify it and talk about it. But, you know, we've seen some legitimate problems with all of these manufacturers. Apple is certainly no exception. The iPhone XS, why? It's a whole new camera. So if you haven't heard about this face smoothing thing, apparently when you take a picture with an iPhone XS, specifically selfies, it seems like somehow people noticed that their features were being smoothed out. So it was insinuated that maybe there was some sort of beauty filter like they use on Snapchat to make your photos look better. And you would assume that someone might do that in order to, I don't know, make the user feel better about the camera. You know, maybe it makes you look better because it smooths out any imperfections. But in any case, a lot of people noticed this, started talking about it, and there were different theories going around as to why this was happening. Well, there's a blog called Halide or Halide.com. I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is for that, but they wanted to talk about how this thing actually works and why. What is this, I should say, about a soft filter on my selfies? Well, according to this blog, it doesn't exist, and instead, the reason this smoothing effect is happening when you take pictures with your iPhone XS is because of better and more aggressive noise reduction due to merged exposures, and merged exposures reducing sharpness by eliminating sharp light dark contrast where light hits part of the skin. So to me, And I'm very primitive when it comes to photography, but to me that sounds a lot like the phone is actually altering the image and making it look smoother. So I don't know if you would technically want to call that a beauty filter, but if your phone takes a picture, and they put them side by side, you know, they've got people who have taken a picture. Let me see if I can find an image here. So I want to say on this one, usually it's the picture on the left comes from the iPhone 10 or the iPhone X. The picture on the right comes from the XS. And you can see that some of the noticeable details from the portraits are disappearing. They're becoming just kind of filled in and smoothed over. The iPhone XS apparently merges exposures and reduces the brightness of the bright areas and reduces the darkness of the shadows. So basically, yes, it's kind of smoothing things out, right? Observant people noticed it isn't just skin that's affected. Coarse textures and particularly anything in the dark from cats to wood grain get a smoother look. This is noise reduction at work. Okay, so, you know, I guess the easy solution to this would be you know, allow people to turn off noise reduction, right? If that's not already a feature. Why the noise reduction? After testing the XS side by side with the X, we found XS prefers a faster shutter speed and higher ISO level. In other words, it takes photos a lot faster, but it comes at the cost of noise. I do know this. At the higher ISO level, you allow more light to get inside, and if you let too much, you start to see distortion, basically fuzziness on the images. So according to this blog, they're saying that the reason we're getting this smoothing effect is based on the way that the camera functions on the newer iPhone. But again, I don't think that this really denies that the effect is happening. All they've really done is to go into an explanation as to why. And I wouldn't equate this, I guess, to a beauty filter, but I would still say, you know, it is smoothing out people's photos, and it's been pretty obvious. You take a look at, well, that's not a good example. Let's see. We had some side-by-sides here. I wanted to pull these up. Let me see if I can find a better article for this. We had some images in some articles. I think this is the one right here. So you can open this up. So you can see on the top here, not only did it smooth out this guy's features, but it also changed the tone, you know, the color quite a bit on this photo. See, do we have more? Or just that one? And then we got a whole bunch of the same stuff. Look at this. This is Steve Harvey. That looks like an exaggeration, but that would be quite a bit of smoothing, I think, on that one. So anyways, this apparently seems to be a thing. And again, you know, there's an easy answer, right? Just allow people to turn off the feature if it's bothering you, which I think it should, really. You know, we've gone to higher and higher resolutions, better HD, and a lot of people got irritated when they used to watch TV and when, you know, DVDs and especially Blu-rays came out, and you would look at your favorite actors and actresses, and they didn't look quite the same, you know, when you had that super high definition. But I mean, that's what it is. So I don't know if maybe adding cinematographic effects might be an answer to make people feel better about watching this stuff. But personally, if I take a picture, I want it to look as close to realistic as possible. So I don't think that this is something that I would want, at least not for the type of photography that I do. What do you guys think? Let's take a look at some comments here. KitKat was the latest. Is allowed to install apps directly on the micro SD card. I consider all upgrades flawed. Get few firmware updates from manufacturers, but rarely bug fixes on Android. I install most of my apps on my SD card. Brilliant Android feature, in my opinion. Saves memory on my device. Yeah, and I agree completely. You know, that was wasn't there a thing though with Android where for a while you could install applications on your SD card, but some of them you couldn't. I seem to remember that there was differentiation, and then yeah, they changed the thing, and there was a point where you couldn't install applications at all, right? I wonder when Apple will finally allow for manual photo adjustment like many Android phones. I've been asking myself that question for a long time, Harvey. I mean, granted, overall, iPhones take good pictures under most conditions, but yes, it would be nice to have access to, I mean, I suppose you could install another app, but you don't have direct control over certain aspects of the the shutter, the camera, the aperture, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is unfortunate. And I suspect never is the answer to that question, because if you think about it, you know, why did they limit the features? Why did they limit the controls that people have over their camera in the iPhone? My first thought is that because the camera does a pretty decent job on its own, Apple wants every photo in general to look good, so that when someone takes a photo with an iPhone, they say, yeah, it's a pretty decent looking photo. Now, it probably could look better, but it could certainly look a lot worse if someone didn't understand how to control those manual options on an iPhone camera. So they might end up taking some terrible pictures and saying my iPhone takes terrible pictures. And that might be, this is just my theory, that might be one of the reasons why Apple didn't give people access to those controls, because that way, even though you don't have the best quality, you have pretty decent quality from every user, even if they don't know what they're doing. Just a guess. Funny how I can just copy movies, music on my device, or SD card. Yeah, well, that is the whole thing with Apple, right? Is controlling your media. I mean, that's the whole point of iTunes in the first place. And I agree. Second, you know, control over the camera and having expandable storage would be huge for iPhones. And I think those are two things that we're never going to see happen, unfortunately. Hey, we almost got wireless. We kind of got wireless charging, so I'm encouraged by that. Finally stepping into the 90s here, Apple. I shouldn't say the 90s, the 2010s, something like that. Up to developer to allow apps on SD card. Most do. Microsoft, one of the few, doesn't, but most do. Okay, yeah, I remember that. I remember there were some apps that I could not install on the micro SD, which is a little frustrating. Piano with Sam, although who knows, they might have done it on purpose so they can sell expensive wireless chargers. Well, did you notice that whole wireless charging air mat thing that Apple is doing just kind of fell off the radar? Apparently that wasn't quite ready to go to market yet, and we just haven't heard anything about it for a while. Anyone have a mobile repair group WhatsApp? That's a good question. If you do, feel free to post it on there. I would be interested. In fact, I have a question for all of you who do mobile repairs. And in fact, and this question is open to anyone. Nate, I was actually going to message you about this and get your take on it. But long story short, I have an iPhone 8 that had a screen repair about 2 weeks ago and currently has a full short to ground on the VDD main line. So I went through everything that's, you know, easy to get to on this, because ultimately what I think is the problem if I do anything further on it, it may reduce the odds that Apple is going to be willing to help this customer, even if they're out of warranty. So what I'm looking at is an iPhone 8 motherboard here that appears to be in perfect condition. However, if you're familiar with it, right about here, I want to say, yeah, right about here on the upper half, not that big black chip there, but one right down next to it, that is where the charging MOSFET is located for the iPhone 8. It is the Q3350, and as soon as I connect the power supply to this, obviously the voltage drops, and that thing feels like it's about to catch fire. Now, there are a couple of capacitors directly on the opposite side of the board, but I don't seem to be able to detect the heat coming from there. It seems like it's coming from the charging MOSFET. Now, my question to anyone who is familiar with this, or hopefully have had some experience on this one, is A, is it likely that the component has shorted somehow internally? There's no visible sign on the outside to say that it has. There are no surrounding components that appear to be damaged. There are some other capacitors in the area that could possibly be causing that to generate heat. I don't think so. But the problem is that thing is buried in that thick, like super glue, almost solid plastic type of underfill. So I'm highly hesitant to dig into that at all, and obviously want to eliminate any other possibilities before I go to that point. So I'm wondering if anyone has seen that happen before. It doesn't seem, I don't know why. I just suspect that there's something else that's the problem. But again, I don't see any visible signs or any other areas that are generating heat. It all seems to point to that right there. So I have my board preheater and all that stuff, but still, being this is such a relatively new phone, problem for this phone, and it has a slightly different charging system. Remember, they replaced the TriStar now. They've got the Hydra chip instead. I don't have a lot of experience with this model when it comes to charging systems, so I'm wondering if anyone has seen this problem surface before. Pull the caps off, 90% chance they're the problem, and let's face it, removing them makes no difference. Yeah, well, Wayne, there's actually two right next to the charging, to the USB connector on the front side, and then there are several in the vicinity on the backside, and I want to say some of those have the same underfill stuff sprayed onto them as well. So I just hate dealing with this stuff, with that stuff, because it's such a headache and it's such a liability to cause problems. But I agree with you. Yeah, the logical thing would be to pull the caps, even if they look good, and then see if that short goes away. So I'm actually waiting for a response from the customer. I want to be certain that this thing is out of warranty before I go any further with it. But if it is, that'll probably be where I start. If it's a heat sink, that's why it gets too hot. So the MOSFET is a heat sink, and that's why it gets too hot. So you would agree that this is pointing to a surrounding component, I'm assuming, the X-Men Force. My Note 4 has a wireless charging, works brilliantly. Yeah, my S6 worked great too. I love that thing. The AirPower Mat, they'll surely have to release the AirPods wireless charging case before or with the AirPower. Anyone? Yeah, so if there is a WhatsApp for that, I'd be curious to hear about it. So let's get on to the next thing. This isn't big news, but it's interesting. I think the whole iOS 12 and the non-charging iOS period, or iPhone X and iPhone XS not charging period, those should be of concern. So good news for my state. I am in California, and I'm proud to say I will certainly take this into consideration at any upcoming elections. Our governor has signed into law Sunday a bill that restores net neutrality protections that President Donald Trump's federal communications, come on, let's be honest, that the big ISPs, Federal Communications Commission, killed last year. So California, among a number of states who are saying, no, it's not okay for you to just start picking and choosing what you want to believe and what you allow people to watch on the internet and have access to. This is just... I can't believe it got taken away in the first place, but we know that the FCC appears to be in the pockets of big ISPs. So this was proposed previously, and then basically the bill was gutted, and that kind of just got, I don't know, it went away. You know, they never passed it. So we came back with an improved version. This is supposed to be close to, or let's see. Brown signed the measure without comment, setting up almost certain showdowns with both ISPs and the FCC, which barred states from setting their own rules in its repeal last December of protections instituted during the administration of President Barack Obama. Now, obviously, immediately what's happening now is that the Attorney General is supposedly... I should pull this article up too. So, the federal government now wants to sue California for instituting their own net neutrality rules. So let's pull this article up. Trump administration sues Nope, that's immigration. That's something else completely. Justice Department, sues to stop California net neutrality law. So what happened to states' rights? Well, if you ever believed in that, there seems to be a lot of people in office now who really don't. So we thought, hey, if there's not going to be a federal law that protects consumers, we'll pass one on the state level, you know, and that's typically it kind of spreads. But the Justice Department on Sunday sued California to stop the state's new law that would guarantee full and equal access to the internet, a principle known as net neutrality. Well, we don't need full and equal access to the internet, right? Shouldn't big corporations be able to tell us what we have access to and charge us extra money if we want to see something that's not in their interests, or penalize us in some way through bandwidth restrictions if we decide that we want to use services that they don't profit from? Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Well, apparently to the Justice Department it does, because they're suing California because we said enough is enough. We need to protect consumers. We need to keep the internet open and free, and obviously companies that can't optimize their profits under those circumstances have spent a lot of money lobbying and contributed, I'm sure, to many campaigns of politicians who will do basically whatever they're told to by big business. So Attorney General Jeff Sessions said that California's net neutrality law was illegal because Congress granted the federal government, through the FCC, the sole authority to create rules for broadband internet providers. So again, the FCC, who obviously has some sort of relationship with big ISPs, has said, yeah, we need to protect our big businesses' interests and in preference to the rights of American citizens. Very sad that this has to happen, but At least we've got something off the ground here in California. There are a number of other states who are doing similar things, Washington being among them, and even some areas where they're talking about building out their own internet services, building out their own ISPs through local government so that they can control that. I mean, even if you say that we can't have net neutrality and no one can tell an ISP what to do, well, if you build your own infrastructure and you fund it with local tax money, then at least that way people at the local level can determine what's right for them, instead of having this thing where we pass a federal law and it affects everyone no matter how you live, where you live. It's crazy. I just don't get it. Governor Jerry Brown really wants to stick it to Trump. That could be his motivation. I don't know. I would assume, he wants to get, he wants votes in the next election. But whatever the reasons are, at least we're getting somewhere with this. This has been going on for too long. And I haven't personally, you guys have seen in my streams, I assume coincidentally, but ever since I started talking about net neutrality, I have had more internet connection problems than I can remember in my entire life. So I'm willing to say that's coincidence, but at the same time, I have read comments from a lot of people who are saying that as soon as net neutrality ceased to exist, they were seeing additional charges tacked onto their cable bills and all sorts of other problems happening. So it has to make you at least suspicious at some point. Hey, what's going on, Joshua Patrick? What's the point of state law if it can be trumped by federal law? Pardon the pun. Doesn't happen down under ever. I mean, never does our federal government override state law. Well, yeah, and that's the thing, Wayne. I would ask the same question, and the problem is, of course, that we just have all sorts of conflicts going on among, a number of institutions and a number of agencies that are all supposed to be working together. It's been happening for a long time, and there's certainly some competition there, but a lot of it seems to boil down to influence that comes from large corporations who have lots of money to say, hey, here's what we want to have happen. And obviously we have differences in philosophy from one state to another. When we talk about the majority of voters, there are groups of people who feel that big business is good for everyone, and there are other people who think that small business is the way to go. And there's certainly a disagreement as to whether we should have more rights given at the state level, or if more things should be mandated on the federal level. I don't know. I don't know why it happens here and not in not so much in Australia, but this is what we're living with. So I'm just happy that we're taking a step in the right direction, and I hope that the federal government trying to sue California, I hope that gets laughed out of court in one way or another, because it seems ridiculous to me. If you said that a federal law prohibited something, for example, we have disagreement on many different things. One of the big ones has been the legalization of marijuana. So regardless of how you feel about that, the thing is, it is not legal on a federal level. It is legal on a state level. So, and it has been this way for a long time. They've had things like medical marijuana since the 90s in California. And for the most part, it seems to depend on the administration in power at the time as to how that is handled on a federal level. During the Obama administration, it was kind of a hands-off approach to, well, it is a federal crime, but we're going to allow states to enforce, anything related to that, as long as we're not talking about anything that crosses state lines. And this would be the big difference here. When we look at something like internet service, you are often connecting to locations that are outside of your state. And I assume this will be one of the arguments that the Department of Justice will use in arguing this case, is that it is, in fact, something that's got to be dealt with on a federal level because it is an interstate, or is it intrastate? Interstate, I think, method of communication. So same thing applies in most cases when we talk about telecommunications. If you make a telephone call, there are federal laws that you must adhere to, but again, you have exceptions at the same time. So there are some states who have a two-party law for consent, where if you're recording a telephone conversation, everyone involved in the conversation has to be aware that the phone call is being recorded. But we have other states where only one person has to be aware of the recording, and the person on the other end of the telephone does not necessarily know that they're being recorded during that call. So obviously, even though we have federal telecommunications laws, we also have laws that occur on a state level. So I am certainly not an attorney. I can't answer, how and why things work that way. Would have been a great question to ask Rick Georges when he was on here last week, but man, that live stream went by so fast. I had so many questions to ask an attorney that we never even got to, but that was a lot of fun. If you guys didn't see it, last Thursday evening, we had Rick Georges. He is an attorney from Florida. Come on. And I want to do more of those in the future where we have people who really specialize in the topic that we're discussing, because I am obviously just a guy who reads articles on the internet and works on phones. But it would be interesting to know what the legal implications are behind this whole mess that's going on, and whether it's even possible for the federal government to stop California from having their own laws when it comes to net neutrality. I don't know. We'll find out at some point, I'm sure. I say let California be its own country and let Puerto Rico become a state. Might as well. I mean, what is the difference between a territory and a state? I never really understood that. I probably should look into it. California be its own country. I think that might be a tough one, Harvey. It could happen. We certainly could support our own economy, I think. In fact, Texas has talked about doing this for a long time too. I have my doubts as to whether that would happen or not, but who knows? USA, strange things are, we have one police force in each state. Our equivalent to your FBI would be the Australian Federal Police, but they only have very minor roles, e.g. Fed organization like airports, social security, etc. Otherwise, state coppers, tell them to piss off, no authority over us at all. Interesting. And I have to say, I keep getting off center here somehow. I have to say that something that was interesting, we'll come back to. Good example, we don't have state telecommunications laws, only federal. Both parties here need to be aware of recordings. Something that I thought that was interesting, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there was a great series on Netflix called Narcos, and it was a dramatization, obviously based on true events of the whole, what is the big cartel in Colombia a while back, Pablo Escobar. So it was a dramatization, but it was all based on that whole story about the cocaine smuggling and things that were going on between the U.S. and there. And more recently, I watched another one about the Iran-Contra thing that was just mind-blowing, because I didn't really, at that time, I wasn't really interested in that stuff. But what I did find fascinating was that at least at that point in time in Colombia, the Attorney General was not basically working for the president. So it was an interesting separation of power. You have the president of Colombia, but then you have the attorney general who is not, being told what to do by the president. His job is to uphold the law and to oversee, the federal level of law enforcement and legislation and that kind of stuff. But he was not like an employee. He wasn't appointed by, I don't think, and he certainly wasn't controlled by the people who were occupying their presidency at that time, which I thought was interesting, because we often pride ourselves here in the U.S. on having a separation of powers, but more recently the separation has become, I don't know, a little less than it was historically speaking. Let's see, 2 seasons of Narcos now. Yeah, actually, that and there's a third one coming out pretty soon, right? I think when they start talking about the, I think they call her like the godmother, who's going to be coming to the U.S. for the whole Florida scene. Pretty cool series if you're into that kind of stuff. Territory doesn't allow for citizens to vote or use government services welfare. It's basically like being an ex-felon. Oh, interesting. I was not aware of that. So if you're in a territory, you can't vote and you can't use government services. So what is your benefit? Because, there was a lot of talk about how we really failed to bring a lot of aid to Puerto Rico, and it is a U.S. territory. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have been helping people that are in a hurricane in the first place, especially when they're that close to where we are. But I'm curious as to what benefit do they get by being a territory? Curious to know. All right, so real quick here, LG V40 ThinQ. If you're not already excited about it, this may not change this might not change your opinion, but I think it's interesting. I certainly like to see some competition coming to the marketplace. And we have a leak that showcases the phone's 5-camera setup. The main focus here seems to be these 3 things. Why do we have to have 3 cameras on? Is it 3 on the back and 2 on the front? I understand. Let's read the article here. On the back side, the phone features tripe camera setup. Okay, I'm not making this up. I don't know who writes these, but I don't think they meant to put tripe. I think what they meant was triple. So I'm just going to assume that. On the back side, the phone features triple camera setup, which appears to have been placed horizontally along with an LED flash. Previously leaked renders have revealed that there will be a fingerprint sensor placed just below the camera sensors. Just put it in the power button, guys. Come on. Earlier leak suggests, is that proper English? That the camera could comprise a 16 megapixel primary sensor, a 12 megapixel super wide angle lens, and an 8 megapixel telephoto zoom lens. Once again, I cannot speak today. Okay, so this is a standard view, a super wide angle, and a telephoto zoom. I am hoping it means that this is an optical zoom lens. That would be really cool. Typically when we use digital zoom, it doesn't really do the photos justice. Coming to the front side, there will be 2 camera sensors, possibly with a combination of an 8 megapixel sensor and a 5 megapixel sensor. Both the camera sensors will be housed inside a notch on top of the display. Among the 2 camera sensors, one is a standard lens while the other is a wide angle lens. So what else are we looking at here? A 6.4-inch OLED screen with quad HD plus screen resolution of 3120 by 1440 pixels and a 19.59 aspect ratio. Of course, it will have to have a Snapdragon 845 octa-core processor. The base variant was 6 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage, and the top model being 8 gigs and 128. And of course, really easy to work on because LG phones always are. I'm just assuming that, but they don't seem to stray too much from their design, and typically they're not too much of a pain to work with. So as long as we don't have problems with boot looping issues, maybe this will be the big deal that we're waiting for LG to launch. I certainly hope so. Let's see. Only real benefit is financial and military aid. Okay, interesting. Isn't that joint North Korea threatened to nuke a territory as well? Isn't that joint? What? Isn't that? Oh, Guam threatened to nuke a U.S. territory as well. Yes, that is correct. And then somebody in Hawaii hit the wrong button and told them that a missile was headed their way. So that was a fun one. I don't know how you make that kind of mistake, but I assume that person's going to have a hard time ever finding a job. Yeah, so North Korea has been making all sorts of silly threats and more recently making concessions, just like they always have. You know, Personally, I don't think that North Korea has changed too much. You know, they say they're going to do something, and then they don't. And then they make a threat, and then they go back to negotiating and say, okay, everything's cool now. And they've been playing this game for a long time. And the one thing that has been constant is that their ability to deliver a nuclear payload has become, you know, closer and closer to reality. That's the one thing that happens when you stall effectively. If you say, okay, we're going to do this. No, we're not going to do this. Well, okay, now we're willing to negotiate. Oh, now we're going to take a hard stance again. If you just keep doing that over and over, eventually your technology will evolve to the point where you become a serious, you know, you're considered a nuclear nation, and then you know, I don't want to get too far into politics, and gosh darn it, I always end up doing it. But long story short, my impression is that North Korea saw what happened in Libya and said, and in Iraq, and said, we don't want the same thing to happen here. And that is, I'm not saying that he's not an evil dude. From what we've seen, Kim Jong-un has not put his population at the top of his list of concerns. But one thing is for sure, he seems to be determined not to have the same thing happen that happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya to his country. So, again, I'm not saying he's in the right. I'm just saying that one thing that he's good at is stalling effectively. And we've seen people say, okay, we're making headway, everything's getting better. And then they say, oh, no, now he's making threats again. So, you know, but as that happens, time goes on. And eventually, if that country is considered a nuclear superpower, then obviously it, to an extent, puts them in a safe zone where it's unlikely that they'll be invaded by another country, but brings a whole other bunch of problems to the table. That's my take. Facebook confirms giving advertisers access to user phone numbers. If you didn't already hear about this last week, because we talked about it briefly on Thursday's stream, if you're using two-factor authentication for your Facebook account, apparently your phone number is being passed on to advertisers, and that would really explain a lot of the text messages that I'm getting on my phone. I'm also getting spammed like crazy on my email recently, and I can't figure out what it was that I signed up for. But I've been getting these weird, you know, those Nigerian prince emails where they say that if you send us $5,000, we're going to send you 10 million or something along those lines. I've been getting those daily for like the last 2 weeks, and I can't figure out why, but it's kind of funny because you would think that whoever's doing it will be smart enough not to send so much information, but on top of it, these things are like 15 paragraphs long, which you lost me after the first two. You know, you really need to get to the point first if you want to convince me to keep going. I really liked Trump when he was first elected, as did most Aussie, but most of us are changing our mind with his latest rhetoric. Who keeps telling everyone about his large brain? WTF with that? Yeah, and that's Wayne Taylor. And you know, again, I try to maintain a bipartisan position here, but it's hard to deny that Trump has been saying some very unusual things that would question one, either his motivation, two, his sanity, or three, maybe he is an evil genius and this is all a big smokescreen. I don't know. But the things that come out of his mouth and onto his Twitter feed, you think that his advisors would tell him, look, dude, you need to stick to the script, get off Twitter, and if you don't, even people, people that currently or previously supported you are not going to be feeling the same way. And it's interesting. I don't know if you guys have been following the whole the whole Kavanaugh thing, but it's crazy what's going on here in the U.S. And at the same time, it's almost refreshing to have a brief a break from the every 5 minutes this is what Trump did, because that's all you see and hear on the news here anymore. It's insane. It's like Trump did this, Trump said that every day. I mean, just nonstop. It's like too much. I'll trade you my Chinese telemarketers with your Nigerian prince. At least you can understand what scam they're trying to pull. Maybe so. Okay, so Facebook confirmed a Wednesday report claiming it gave advertisers access to user phone numbers and contact lists. According to an article on thedailybeast.com, we use the information people provide to offer a better, more personalized experience on Facebook, including ads. A Facebook spokesman told AFP, "We are clear about how we use the information we collect, including the contact information that people upload or add to their own accounts. So it's your fault. If you gave Facebook your phone number and now you're getting spam text messages or phone calls, well, you agreed to those terms, right?" I mean, honestly, that's pretty much how it generally happens when we complain about Facebook having access to our photo galleries or the microphone or our location services or anything like that. It's all buried in that 1,500-page terms and conditions that you agreed to by checking a little box. But man, it seems like there needs to be a law that says that these terms need to be easy to understand and not require you to invest an hour reading every little line to make sure that someone's not doing something they shouldn't be. Hey, my stream health is back to normal. I don't know how that happened. But this is annoying. In fact, I want to read you one of these emails if we have time in just a second. Buggered if I know. Some stuff he says now is just bizarre. Really seems to think his poo doesn't stink. I seriously, trying to be as objective as possible, I suspect that Trump is, again, either purposely doing some really crazy stuff or has some sort of issues that are affecting his judgment. And one way or another, this is not good for anyone, because if you have someone who represents your country as a leader, you shouldn't have to have a hard time questioning or knowing when they're joking and when they're not. This is one of the things that really bugs me. If someone's in control, if someone's in power, and they make a statement that sounds like they're being serious, well, they should be serious. They shouldn't come back later and say, "Oh, I was just kidding," because then you really don't know when they're being serious. So how do you have effective communication when it's impossible to know if someone's being sincere and when they're not? That to me is a big problem. Come on, the guy you had on last week, the lawyer, saying you need to read full terms of service is ridiculous in my opinion. Yeah, and well, that's the thing. Nobody reads that stuff. Come on. But I do have one for you real quick. If we have, actually, I'm not going to say real quick. I wish I could screen share this thing instead. Maybe there's a way that I can. Let's see. Let me see if I can get this off screen first. You know what? Let's skip it. I'll read you the beginning of it. This thing is just insane. See if we can find it here, Mike. This is how they all start out, though. This is the way to know, obviously. I don't think anyone's falling for these anymore, but they all start out exactly the same. Hello. Firstly, I would like to plead that you should not consider this unsolicited mail as a means to disrespect you or delve into your privacy without caution, but the sensitive nature of my proposal has prompted me to reach you through this route in order for me to confidently share and discuss my intentions, which would be mutually beneficial to both of us in due time. Your contact details were extracted from an online directory here in Afghanistan. During my search for a capable hand that would be willing to support me diligently in executing the project I wish to talk about with you. I gotta tell you, if you're trying to scam me for money, or anyone for that matter, you might want to cut down that introduction a little bit. There's still about 9 more paragraphs after that before they actually talk about what they're getting to. And if I scroll down here enough, where is it here? Something about April 22nd of 2006, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here we go. So in light of the above is well understood, I would like to introduce myself to you properly. My names are Sergeant Monica L. Brown. I am assigned to 782nd Brigade Support Battalion, 4th Brigade Combat Team, and 82nd Airborne Division. I am seeking your assistance to evacuate the sum of $10.5 million. Okay, it says $10,500,000. Then in parentheses, it says $10,500,000 United States dollars. As far as I can be assured that it will be safe in your care until I complete my service here in Iraq. So there is a brigade, what was her position again? Oh, there's a sergeant in Afghanistan that needs me to hold on to $10.5 million until she can get back to the U.S. So you guys will understand if I'm not around ever again. Yeah, I'm not going to quit my day job yet, but the weird thing is I keep getting the same email, but from different people and slightly different verbiage. So I don't know what the deal is here with that. I can't listen to anything what Trump says. Hearing is limited. Vocabulary makes my IQ go down. That's Harvey. He certainly has changed a lot. If you compare Trump now to Trump about 20 years ago, his ability to be an effective speaker have certainly changed. And I don't know what to attribute that to. I'm not even going to take a guess because who knows, but funny things are going on. In any case, friends, that was about it for today. Let's shut that one off. And I am going to have to get back to work here shortly. I do appreciate you coming by. This Thursday, we're getting back. Hey, I didn't see real world reviews on here. This Thursday, we're going to get back to some conspiracy theory talk. So if you're into that stuff, be sure to come on. It's going to be 6 o'clock at Thursday evening, right? 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 o'clock on the East Coast. I don't know about the other time zones. The other side of the world, Wayne, it's more money, something like that, right? Monday morning, Friday morning. I'm all confused. Today's Monday. Haven't determined the topic yet, but I have so many to choose from. Hopefully, Real World Review will be joining me here, so we have a conversation. I'm interested to hear your input also. And crazy thing is that 9/11 conspiracy video kind of took off, got a lot of views, all things considered. So I want to continue to do that probably at least every other week for a while. I mean, it's fun. It's interesting. I don't think I'm crazy. I just think that these things are interesting to talk about, but who knows. Send her money ASAP for sure. I spent 4 months to and fro with Nigerian scammer via email. Eventually, I promised to send the 10K. No chance he wanted, but I needed $50 to do the transfer. He sent me the $50. Are you serious, Wayne? Oh, man, we got to start scamming scammers. You know, you can also use that email bot. I wish I could think of the website, but if you have a spam email that's asking you for money, you can actually forward that email with the sender's information to a website, and there's an artificial intelligence that will continue that conversation the same way that you're talking about doing, but you don't have to put any of the effort in. They will compose emails that sound human. They'll ask questions. They'll go back and forth and tie up this person's time for long periods, which I think is exciting. I think it's fun. And you can go on their website and read some of those conversations. They are hilarious. All right, Wayne, I'm going to answer this email and see if I can get them to send me $50. And if I do, I'll put it right here and show you guys. I got to get to work. I got a bunch of phones stacked up to finish off. Again, thanks everyone for joining me. It will be, let's see, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 3 days. I'll be back. If you can't make it Thursday, I'll see you on Monday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Have a good week. And I went to the wrong frame. How did that happen? Second mistake. That's it, I think.